Hey, the Schilling Show continues here on a Tuesday edition of the program. I'm very pleased to welcome here to the studio Dr. Tom Palmer, Executive Vice President for International Programs at the Atlas Network and a Senior Fellow at Cato Institute. He's going to be speaking tonight at the University of Virginia on the impact of libertarian student movement over the years. I'm so pleased to have you here, Dr. Tom Palmer, and thank you for making time. I know you have a very busy schedule for joining us in person.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
You set 3 books down in front of me, and there's one that the title of it just hit me right in the face based on what's going on right now, and it's called Self-Control or State Control, You Decide, and you are the editor of this book. It's a profound title because right now we're seeing people clamoring for state control, whether it's our speech, our ability to assemble in places, our ability to hold certain beliefs. It's really getting frightening.
Well, I think there is a close connection between the growth of state power and the limitation of individual sovereignty, but also it means that our moral muscles are atrophied. When we're told these bad views have to shut up, well, what happens to our critical faculties? We no longer are able to examine ideas and accept or reject them on our own. I think that what we need to do is to reinforce the idea of some, frankly, old-fashioned virtues. Think for yourself, to learn to control yourself, to learn to control impulses. I wish our president would learn that. He's sorely lacking in that department. And to be a rational person, and that means accepting responsibility for your life and not foisting it off on government to make decisions for you.
A big part of this is the ability, when you talk about self-control, to hear contradictory statements that people make that you may not agree with, or ideologies that that maybe make you angry, but to control yourself instead of physically assaulting somebody or trying to drive them out of town or underground, which is what we're seeing here and across the country.
Well, I think that's exactly right. And of course, even from the perspective of strategy, it doesn't work. When you make something forbidden fruit or drive it underground, it seems much more attractive to alienated persons who feel this system doesn't listen to me. I think we're much better off with the principle that John Stuart Mill articulated, which is, let's have freedom of speech and discussion. And crazy, marginal, wacky ideas tend to be driven to the corners in those societies. I remember in the Soviet Union, where I spent quite a bit of time before the fall of the wall, because they didn't have freedom of speech, they had an official state-enforced ideology. You've heard people spouting the craziest ideas, and they would be at every level of society. Professors at university believed our minds were controlled by Martians and all kinds of crazy ideas. And it was precisely because there was no free discussion, no free media, no free newspapers, where these ideas could be aired and then shown to be absurd and ridiculous. Free societies are much more likely to converge on reasonable principles because there is that give and take of debate and critical examination.
We're talking with Dr. Tom Palmer, author of a number of books, and he'll be speaking tonight at the University of Virginia. This is open to the public. That would be 7 p.m. at the Student Activities Center. I hope you'll take time to go visit. Students for Individual Liberty, celebrating 30 years of peace, love, and liberty. As we look at the student movement for individual liberty across America, tell us how it's coming along. Is this a growing movement? Is it just kind of treading water? How do you see it?
Well, actually, I'm very optimistic in that regard. It is growing. Students for Liberty has chapters all over the United States and Canada, and actually all over the world. The biggest Students for Liberty meetings have been in Nigeria and Kenya, where they've had 1,081 students in Nigeria, 562 in Kenya. They had almost 1,000 in Prague for European Students for Liberty. So they're all over the world. And this is a movement that believes in people coexisting peacefully, engaging in free trade and exchange, the multiplicity of different ways of life and religions that can indeed live together if they accept the principle of live and let live. It's really pretty simple. So I'm optimistic in that regard. I am worried, though, about the future of the United States as we seem to be generally descending into more and more ugliness articulated at every level. And I have to say, on both sides of the political aisle, demonizing each other. This is very, very worrisome because when that situation emerges, people feel they have to choose sides, and it's either oppress or be oppressed. We saw that in the Weimar Republic, and I fear that we may be repeating some of that. I certainly hope not, that these extremes clash in public, and let's say the middle, the people who just would like to go about their lives, are squeezed out and silenced. So I am concerned about the future of the United States and the ugliness of political rhetoric. I do think that President Trump has really degraded our political discourse enormously, but unfortunately there's been a response in kind. And I think that this is cause for concern. It makes the idea of the libertarian movement much more important to clear that space for rational discussion and debate, and to allow different viewpoints to be heard, and to try to live together.
Dr. Palmer, I want to ask you, in your opinion, how we got here, why we are in this place right now where people, instead of being willing to listen and have a rational discussion, resort to physical, verbal violence or other sorts of threats.
Well, I wrote a piece recently for the Cato Institute that's online about 3 major threats to liberty that have emerged. You could Google my name, cato.org, Tom Palmer, and threats to liberty, and find it. I think that 3 things have converged. There are 3 movements that are symbiotic. That is to say, they seem to be in opposition to each other, but they in fact fuel each other. They are the out-of-control political correctness movement, which has shut down discussion on political campuses. They say no platforming, safe spaces, and so on. And that has called forth a very ugly response of this so-called alt-right. One identity politics has called forth another. The ideas of Herbert Marcuse, who was a very interesting, kind of crazy philosopher at the University of California, San Diego, he said that true liberation means you're not allowed to think thoughts that are not correct. We will control everyone in thought, word, and deed. And this is being played out on college campuses now, where anyone who disagrees, even in a modest way, is just told to shut up. It's not every place. There are extreme cases. But it is a trend, and it is now called forth this very ugly, hateful alt-right reaction. And then the third that interacts with them is political Islamism, which presents a feeling of being threatened externally. I think that as a matter of statistics, the external threat is quite small. The chance of being killed by an Islamist terrorist in the U.S. are vanishingly tiny. But it's on the news 24 hours a day, and it creates this feeling of an existential threat. And this has driven these extreme far-right populist racist movements in Europe to a very strong degree, and also contributed to it in the United States as well. So those 3, like a triangle, are converging. Each one, as it grows, gives energy to the other ones. And frankly, they like this. This Nazi leader, Richard Spencer, who's an out-and-out National Socialist, anti-Semite, Hitler follower, when one of those Antifa people punched him on a video, that gave him more credibility and more publicity than anything he in his pitiful life had ever accomplished before that. That's exactly what they want. They want the other side to be energized so they can recruit more and be energized.
Finally, Dr. Palmer, I want to ask you about the government school monopoly, because it's my contention that students are being bred for this sort of lack of critical thought in this government school where they're being indoctrinated daily without the open discussion that you referenced. Do you see that as a problem? If so, what do we need to do to fix it?
Well, I think there's a long-term problem with one monopoly power controlling information, whether it's through religion or schooling or anything else. I think that the movement for homeschooling and charter schools has been very, very positive. All kinds of voluntary alternatives to state schooling that have kept alive critical discourse. So I do have great concerns about the public school monopoly, and I think that they deaden children. They deaden their willingness to ask questions and think for themselves and just be and think differently. I think that school choice is one of the solutions to break up that monopoly. I wouldn't overemphasize its role in the most recent crisis. We've had it now for a very, very long time. But I do think that it has a generally deadening impact on the population. And quite frankly, the quality of education at the primary and high school level has been declining for a long time because of this lack of competition.
Dr. Tom G. Palmer is Executive Vice President for International Programs for the Atlas Network, a Senior Fellow at Cato Institute, and speaking tonight at the University of Virginia Students for Individual Liberty, celebrating 30 years of peace, love, and liberty. And it's taking place 7 p.m. at the Student Activity Center. All people are welcome, and I hope you'll take advantage of the opportunity to attend. If people want to get you online, if they want to get copies of your books, Dr. Palmer, how could they do that?
Easiest way is Google my name, Tom G. Palmer. I'm not an Australian rugby player or a country western singer. I'm the other guy.
Okay.
And you can find my email address. Drop me a note, and I'll, at gratis, at my own expense, send you a copy of one of these books if you find it interesting.
Thank you so much for joining us today on The Schilling Show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.